Evelyn Lewis, a fearless woman with a heart for justice, believed that true change was worth any risk, even if it meant hiding parts of herself from those she loved most. One day, her granddaughter Maya uncovers Evelyn's secret past, setting off a journey that transforms her family forever. As Maya pieces together hidden letters, lost friends, and the legacy of Evelyn's partner Charles, she reveals a story of love, courage, and sacrifice beyond anything her family imagined. What unexpected truths does Maya find about her grandmother? How does one young woman's determination bring a buried legacy back to life? Stay tuned to uncover the secrets that changed a family and a community forever. And before we dive into this journey of resilience and honor, let us know where you're watching from. And if Evelyn's story resonates with you, hit subscribe to join us for more. The attic was silent, bathed in the soft morning light that seeped through a small, dusty window. Maya Lewis, a curious 17-year-old with a keen eye for detail, stood at the threshold, her gaze drifting over the stacks of old boxes and forgotten memories. Her father, Jamal, had never been one to share stories about the past, especially about her late grandmother, Evelyn. But Maya's instincts told her that the attic held secrets, secrets her father didn't want to share. Today, she felt ready to uncover whatever her family was hiding. Taking a deep breath, Maya stepped into the dusty room, her sneakers leaving faint prints in the layer of dust that covered the wooden floor. She scanned the shelves and stacks of boxes, unsure where to start. Then something caught her eye. A small, ornate chest tucked into the far corner, half hidden beneath an old quilt. Her heart pounded as she lifted the quilt, revealing a beautiful, age-worn box carved with intricate designs. "Maya, don't stay up there too long." Jamal's voice echoed up the stairs, a familiar blend of worry and impatience. "I won't, Dad," she called back, her voice barely covering the excitement bubbling inside. Carefully, she lifted the latch of the chest, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue cloth, was a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was etched with her grandmother's initials, E.L., and even in its age, the book seemed alive, buzzing with the stories it held. Maya sat on the floor, feeling the weight of the book in her hands as if it were filled with the very essence of her grandmother. She opened the diary carefully, feeling almost like an intruder, yet unable to resist. On the first page, Evelyn's handwriting flowed across the paper in elegant, looping letters. "To those who will one day read this, never forget that the past holds power, and the truth, even buried, will always find its way to light." A chill ran down Maya's spine as she read the words. She turned the pages slowly, each entry unveiling a new layer of her grandmother's world. There were mentions of marches, whispered meetings, and someone named Charles, whom Evelyn described with both admiration and sorrow. The more Maya read, the more she felt a connection to this mysterious part of her grandmother's life, a connection she had never felt before. Just as she reached a particularly intriguing passage, her father's voice called up again, louder and firmer this time. "Maya, come down for breakfast." Reluctantly, Maya closed the diary, tucking it back into its cloth and placing it inside the chest. She carefully rearranged the quilt over the chest, hiding it once again. But even as she walked down the stairs, the words from the diary echoed in her mind. Who was Charles? And why had her grandmother, a woman who had always seemed so gentle and warm, kept this part of her life so hidden? At the breakfast table, Jamal gave her a questioning look, his dark brown eyes softened by years of worry and love. "What were you doing up there?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just looking around," Maya replied, shrugging. "It's so dusty up there. You never told me we had so much stuff in the attic." Jamal's expression tightened slightly, but he quickly covered it with a smile. Well, most of it's junk, really. Just dull memories, not worth much now. Maya nodded, but inside her curiosity burned hotter than ever. She decided to push a little further. Did Grandma Evelyn ever talk to you about her life? You know, before you were born? Jamal's smile faded, replaced by a guarded look. Your grandmother was a private woman, Maya. She didn't like to talk much about the past. But she was involved in the civil rights movement, right? Maya pressed, trying to keep her voice casual. Jamal's face grew serious. Yes, she was, but those were hard times, and not everything from then is safe to talk about. Maya's curiosity flared, but she could see the conversation was reaching a wall. I get it, Dad, she said gently, sensing his unease. She'd learned long ago that her father guarded certain memories like precious artifacts, keeping them under lock and key. Yet, as she finished her breakfast, her thoughts drifted back to the diary upstairs and the mysterious Charles Evelyn had written about. Who was he, and why did her father seem so afraid of the past? That night, after Jamal had gone to bed, Maya lay in her room, the house silent around her. She replayed her father's words in her mind. It was clear he didn't want her digging into Evelyn's life. But Maya couldn't let it go. Something about the diary felt unfinished, as if her grandmother had left it there for a reason. Just after midnight, unable to resist any longer, Maya slipped out of bed and crept quietly up the stairs. She opened the chest, pulled out the diary, and returned to her room, lighting a small bedside lamp. The dim glow cast a warm light over the pages as she resumed reading. Each entry pulled her deeper into Evelyn's story. Evelyn spoke of sleepless nights, of courage and fear, and of a community bound together by hope and struggle. And then there was Charles, a man of unwavering conviction, someone her grandmother had cared about deeply. One passage caught Maya's attention. Charles and I were unstoppable, at least we thought we were. We believed we could change the world, but the world isn't always ready for change. Maya traced her fingers over the ink, her mind whirling with questions. Why had Evelyn hidden these memories away? Why had she kept Charles's name a secret from her family? Just as she turned the page, she heard a creak outside her door. Her heart leapt. She closed the diary and slid it under her pillow as her door opened slightly, revealing her father standing there, silhouetted in the dim light. "What are you doing up so late, Maya?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. Maya felt her cheeks warm, realizing she must look guilty. "Just couldn't sleep," she replied, hoping he wouldn't press further. But Jamal's eyes seemed to linger on her longer than usual, as if he knew exactly what she'd been up to. After a moment, he nodded. "All right, try to get some rest, okay?" As he closed the door, Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She knew she was treading into forbidden territory, but the pull of the past was undeniable. For the first time in her life, she felt connected to her grandmother in a way that transcended time and distance. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd keep searching. There was something her grandmother wanted her to find, and Maya was determined to honor that silent, lingering call. The next morning, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her grandmother's diary held something monumental, something that could reshape her understanding of her family. As she got ready for school, her mind raced through the bits and pieces she'd read. The thought of Charles lingered, like a shadow, casting doubt over everything she thought she knew about Evelyn. What kind of relationship had they shared? And why had Evelyn kept him hidden away in these dusty pages? At breakfast, Jamal watched her silently from across the table, his face shadowed with an expression she hadn't seen before. Maya had a feeling he'd guessed she'd been reading Evelyn's diary, but he said nothing, and Maya decided she'd keep her discoveries to herself, at least for now. When she arrived at school, Maya found Zoe waiting for her by the front gate, as always. Her best friend's face lit up as she spotted her. "Morning, stranger," Zoe teased, falling into step beside her. "You look different. What's up?" Maya glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "I found something at home, something big." Zoe's eyes widened. "Like treasure?" "Not exactly," Maya replied, lowering her voice. "I found my Grandma Evelyn's old diary in our attic. It's full of secrets from when she was young, mentions of the civil rights movement, and this guy named Charles who... Well, I don't know who he is, but it feels important. Dad's acting weird about it too." Zoe raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "You mean like a forbidden romance or something?" Maya shrugged. "Maybe. It's more than that, though. The way she writes about him, it's like he was a part of her life that nobody ever knew about. And she talked about the movement, marches, secret meetings. It sounds dangerous." Zoe's face lit up with excitement. "Maya, this is huge! Your grandma could have been a real activist, and if she kept it hidden, maybe it was because it was too dangerous to talk about." Maya nodded, her thoughts spinning. She hadn't considered the idea of Evelyn as an activist, but the clues made it seem possible. "I think she wanted me to find it," Maya whispered, almost to herself. "Like she left it there on purpose." "Then we have to find out what happened," Zoe said, her voice full of determination. "We can look up records, check the library archives, whatever it takes." Maya felt a thrill at the idea. She hadn't realized how much she wanted to understand Evelyn's world until this moment. As they walked to class, the two friends made plans to visit the city archives after school. They would comb through records, looking for anything that might connect Evelyn to Charles or reveal her role in the civil rights movement. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Maya found it impossible to concentrate, her mind fixated on the diary's pages and the mysteries they hinted at. By the time the final bell rang, she and Zoe were practically racing out the school doors. An hour later, they were at the city archives, buried in stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings and faded photographs. For the first time, Maya could see glimpses of the world her grandmother had lived in, a world of defiant courage, of marches and protests, of people standing side by side, demanding justice. Then she saw it. A newspaper article from 1964 with a photograph of a crowd gathered outside a church. There, standing near the back, was a young woman who looked exactly like Evelyn. And beside her, a tall man with an intense gaze, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Maya's heart raced. She scanned the caption, "Local civil rights activists prepare for march." Below that, two names jumped out at her, Evelyn Lewis and Charles Carter. She held up the clipping for Zoe to see, her voice barely a whisper. "This is it. This is Charles." Zoe's eyes were wide. "Your grandma? She was really part of this? And Charles, he must have been too?" Maya felt a surge of pride, awe, and a faint sense of fear. She was beginning to understand why Jamal had wanted to keep this part of their family's history hidden. It was dangerous, even now. But as she stared at the photograph, Maya knew she was only at the beginning of uncovering her grandmother's hidden legacy, and she wouldn't stop until she knew the whole story. Maya's fingers trembled as she carefully folded the old newspaper clipping, slipping it into her notebook. She glanced over at Zoe, whose eyes were still wide with excitement. "We have to tell your dad," Zoe whispered, though her face held an expression that suggested she already knew Jamal might not be eager to hear it. Maya shook her head. Not yet. If he knew I was digging this deeply, he'd make sure I never found out anything more. I have to figure out as much as I can on my own first. Zoe nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's like, maybe your grandma didn't just keep her past hidden from your dad. Maybe she did it because she was still protecting something, or someone. Maya nodded, staring at the photo of her grandmother and Charles, a man she had never heard of until now, but who seemed so deeply rooted in Evelyn's life. Her mind reeled with the realization of the courage and secrecy her grandmother must have harbored to keep this part of herself hidden all these years. She wondered what exactly had driven Evelyn to lock away these memories. The next few days, Maya returned to the archives whenever she could. She combed through countless articles, reading everything she could find about the civil rights movement in their city and the activists who had risked their lives to fight for equality. Time after time, she saw mention of her grandmother and Charles, always appearing together in photos and stories. It was becoming clear that they had been partners in every sense of the word, united by both their love and their shared commitment to justice. One evening, after another long day of research, Maya found herself back at the attic. She was desperate to uncover any further traces of Evelyn's past. Her father had gone out for the evening, giving her a rare opportunity to search without fear of interruption. She climbed the creaky stairs with her flashlight in hand, feeling the weight of her grandmother's hidden story urging her forward. Pushing aside boxes and old belongings, Maya opened one after another, finding mostly old clothes, books, and faded photos that seemed unconnected to what she was looking for. But finally, in the bottom of a box labeled Miscellaneous, she spotted an old leather folder, its edges worn from age. Inside, she found a collection of letters, their yellowed pages brittle with time. As she held them under the flashlight, she felt the pulse of history come alive in her hands. Each letter was signed with the same initials, C.C. Charles Carter. Maya's heart raced as she began to read, losing herself in the words he had written to her grandmother. These letters revealed the depths of his feelings for Evelyn, his admiration, his devotion, and, more than anything else, his determination to stand beside her, no matter the cost. One passage made her pause, the words jumping off the page with chilling clarity. "Evie, we both know the risks, but if we can make even the smallest difference, it'll be worth it. I'd rather stand with you and face whatever comes than live in a world where we never tried." Maya's eyes blurred as she thought of the love and bravery woven into those lines, of the risks her grandmother and Charles had taken. She felt a newfound pride surge through her, a fierce appreciation for the legacy she was now responsible for uncovering. They had risked everything to fight for something bigger than themselves, and they had kept this part of their lives secret to protect those they loved. As she read through the rest of the letters, she was struck by a recurring theme. Charles had feared that someone powerful, was watching them, waiting for an opportunity to bring them down. Charles had written of feeling hunted, of friends being followed, and of threats that had forced many to go into hiding. His final letter was short, as though he had written it hastily, perhaps in a moment of fear. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I can't say more, but you must stay safe. Tell Jamal nothing. Protect him and protect yourself. I'll find my way back to you. Someday." Maya let out a shaky breath. Charles had vanished without a trace, and her grandmother had spent her life concealing this part of her past. Her heart ached at the realization of how lonely Evelyn must have felt, guarding these memories alone. That night, Maya lay awake, the letters by her side. She wanted to tell her father, to share with him the depth of their family's history. But as she recalled his guarded expression and the pain in his eyes whenever she mentioned Evelyn's past, she knew he wouldn't be ready to hear it. The next day, unable to focus on school or anything else, Maya decided she needed more answers. She skipped her usual classes and returned to the archives, determined to piece together every last detail of the story. She was so engrossed in her research that she didn't notice the man standing in the shadows near the entrance, watching her. Later that evening, as Maya left the archives with a folder of newly discovered documents, she noticed someone following her. Her pulse quickened, and she glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the same man who had been watching her in the library. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, and his gaze was sharp and unyielding. Heart pounding, she quickened her pace, her mind racing as she wondered who he was and why he was watching her. Was he someone from her grandmother's past? Or was he a warning, proof that Evelyn's fears hadn't been unfounded? When she reached her house, she bolted the door behind her, peering out the window as she tried to catch her breath. The man had stopped at the end of her driveway, his face shrouded in shadows. He stared at her house for a long moment before turning and disappearing into the night. Maya leaned against the door, her mind reeling. The old fears Evelyn and Charles had spoken of were real. Whoever had threatened them all those years ago hadn't gone away. And now Maya had drawn their attention. Maya's fingers trembled as she carefully folded the old newspaper clipping, slipping it into her notebook. She glanced over at Zoe, whose eyes were still wide with excitement. "We have to tell your dad," Zoe whispered, though her face held an expression that suggested she already knew Jamal might not be eager to hear it. Maya shook her head. "Not yet. If he knew I was digging this deeply, he'd make sure I never found out anything more. I have to figure out as much as I can on my own first." Zoe nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's like, maybe your grandma didn't just keep her past hidden from your dad. Maybe she did it because she was still protecting something. Or someone." Maya nodded, staring at the photo of her grandmother and Charles, a man she had never heard of until now, but who seemed so deeply rooted in Evelyn's life. Her mind reeled with the realization of the courage and secrecy her grandmother must have harbored to keep this part of herself hidden all these years. She wondered what exactly had driven Evelyn to lock away these memories. The next few days Maya returned to the archives whenever she could. She combed through countless articles, reading everything she could find about the civil rights movement in their city and the activists who had risked their lives to fight for equality. Time after time, she saw mention of her grandmother and Charles, always appearing together in photos and stories. It was becoming clear that they had been partners in every sense of the word, united by both their love and their shared commitment to justice. One evening, after another long day of research, Maya found herself back at the attic. She was desperate to uncover any further traces of Evelyn's past. Her father had gone out for the evening, giving her a rare opportunity to search without fear of interruption. She climbed the creaky stairs with her flashlight in hand, feeling the weight of her grandmother's hidden story urging her forward. Pushing aside boxes and old belongings, Maya opened one after another, finding mostly old clothes, books, and faded photos that seemed unconnected to what she was looking for. But finally, in the bottom of a box labeled Miscellaneous, she spotted an old leather folder, its edges worn from age. Inside, she found a collection of letters, their yellowed pages brittle with time. As she held them under the flashlight, she felt the pulse of history come alive in her hands. Each letter was signed with the same initials, C.C. Charles Carter. Maya's heart raced as she began to read, losing herself in the words he had written to her grandmother. These letters revealed the depths of his feelings for Evelyn, his admiration, his devotion, and, more than anything else, his determination to stand beside her, no matter the cost. One passage made her pause, the words jumping off the page with chilling clarity. "Evie, we both know the risks, but if we can make even the smallest difference, it'll be worth it. I'd rather stand with you and face whatever comes than live in a world where we never tried." Maya's eyes blurred as she thought of the love and bravery woven into those lines, of the risks her grandmother and Charles had taken. She felt a newfound pride surge through her, a fierce appreciation for the legacy she was now responsible for uncovering. They had risked everything to fight for something bigger than themselves, and they had kept this part of their lives secret to protect those they loved. As she read through the rest of the letters, she was struck by a recurring theme. Charles had feared that someone powerful, was watching them, waiting for an opportunity to bring them down. Charles had written of feeling hunted, of friends being followed, and of threats that had forced many to go into hiding. His final letter was short, as though he had written it hastily, perhaps in a moment of fear. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I can't say more, but you must stay safe. Tell Jamal nothing. Protect him and protect yourself. I'll find my way back to you. Someday." Maya let out a shaky breath. Charles had vanished without a trace, and her grandmother had spent her life concealing this part of her past. Her heart ached at the realization of how lonely Evelyn must have felt, guarding these memories alone. That night, Maya lay awake, the letters by her side. She wanted to tell her father, to share with him the depth of their family's history. But as she recalled his guarded expression and the pain in his eyes whenever she mentioned Evelyn's past, she knew he wouldn't be ready to hear it. The next day, unable to focus on school or anything else, Maya decided she needed more answers. She skipped her usual classes and returned to the archives, determined to piece together every last detail of the story. She was so engrossed in her research that she didn't notice the man standing in the shadows near the entrance, watching her. Later that evening, as Maya left the archives with a folder of newly discovered documents, she noticed someone following her. Her pulse quickened, and she glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the same man who had been watching her in the library. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, and his gaze was sharp and unyielding. Heart pounding, she quickened her pace, her mind racing as she wondered who he was and why he was watching her. Was he someone from her grandmother's past? Or was he a warning, proof that Evelyn's fears hadn't been unfounded? When she reached her house, she bolted the door behind her, peering out the window as she tried to catch her breath. The man had stopped at the end of her driveway, his face shrouded in shadows. He stared at her house for a long moment before turning and disappearing into the night. Maya leaned against the door, her mind reeling. The old fears Evelyn and Charles had spoken of were real. Whoever had threatened them all those years ago hadn't gone away. And now Maya had drawn their attention. Maya spent the rest of the night pacing her room, her mind racing with thoughts of the stranger who had followed her home. Fear gnawed at her, but something deeper was driving her forward, a fierce, unshakable resolve to understand her family's past. She knew now that there was real danger in uncovering Evelyn's story. But she couldn't turn back, not with so many questions left unanswered. The following morning, Maya met Zoe at their usual spot outside the school gates, sharing everything that had happened. Zoe listened, her face a mix of awe and concern. "Are you serious? Someone was actually watching you," Zoe whispered, casting a nervous glance around as if expecting to see the man nearby. "Maya, this is getting really intense. Do you think you should tell your dad?" Maya shook her head. "Not yet. I don't want him shutting me down. There's something here I need to understand. About Grandma, about Charles, and whoever's trying to keep this hidden." Zoe's face softened with understanding, but her eyes still held a trace of worry. "If you're going to keep digging, promise me you'll be careful." "I don't want anything to happen to you." Maya smiled, grateful for her friend's loyalty. "I promise, and I could use your help. I want to go back to that old church from the photos, the one where Evelyn and Charles were standing. I feel like I might find more answers there." They decided to meet that evening after dark, when the church grounds would be deserted. All day, Maya struggled to focus in class, her thoughts consumed by the journey ahead. The sense of urgency had only grown stronger since the encounter with the stranger, and she felt that every moment counted. When night finally fell, Maya and Zoe met in the shadowy streets outside the old church, the building's worn silhouette looming against the night sky. The wooden doors were padlocked, but the two girls managed to slip through a side entrance where the hinges had rusted and weakened. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence, broken only by the creak of their footsteps echoing in the hollow space. The church had clearly been abandoned for years. Broken pews lined the main aisle, and the stained glass windows were cracked and clouded with grime. Yet, as Maya moved through the empty space, she felt a strange sense of connection. It was almost as if she could sense the presence of her grandmother and Charles, as if their spirits lingered in the very walls of this forgotten place. They searched the sanctuary, looking for anything that might hint at the hidden history of the church and its role in the civil rights movement. Finally, in a small room off to the side, Maya discovered a dusty box tucked away in a cabinet. Inside were old, faded flyers and leaflets calling for rallies and meetings, their messages of unity and strength still visible beneath the dust. On one of the leaflets, she saw her grandmother's handwriting, signing off as the event organizer. Evelyn had been at the heart of it all, mobilizing people to stand together and fight. As they sifted through the papers, Zoe let out a soft gasp, holding up a small, worn notebook. Maya opened it, her breath catching as she recognized Evelyn's handwriting once again. The pages were filled with meeting notes, strategies, and sketches of safe routes through the city, but one entry stood out, marked with a hastily scrawled warning. "They're watching. We need to be cautious. Charles says they've been following him, and others have gone missing. We have to protect everyone." Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. The dangers Evelyn and Charles had faced were real, and they had known the risks all too well. Their lives had been under constant surveillance by people who sought to suppress them, to crush the hope they offered to others. She looked at Zoe, both of them realizing the enormity of the situation. "We have to get these back home," Maya whispered, stuffing the notebook and flyers into her bag. "Whatever happened to Charles, it wasn't an accident. I think they tried to silence him." The drive back to Maya's house was quiet, each girl lost in thought. Once home, Maya carefully laid out the notebook and the leaflets on her bed, flipping through the pages over and over, as if willing the words to reveal something more. She was close, she could feel it, but without more clues, the details remained frustratingly out of reach. Later that night, Maya's father knocked on her door. She quickly covered the papers with her blanket, heart pounding as Jamal stepped into the room. "You've been quiet lately," he said softly, his expression unreadable. "I know you're curious about your grandmother's life, but, Maya, some things are better left buried. She hesitated, wanting so badly to tell him everything she'd found, to share the legacy Evelyn had fought so hard to protect. But she knew he wasn't ready. The fear in his eyes told her he'd lived with the weight of this story for years, carrying secrets he never wanted to face. "I understand, Dad," she replied gently, forcing herself to hold back. "I won't push any more." He gave her a long, searching look, as if he sensed her inner turmoil. But finally, he nodded and left the room, leaving Maya to her thoughts once more. The following afternoon, Maya decided to seek out the one person who might know more than anyone else about Evelyn and Charles, Mr. Harold Jones, the caretaker of the old church and one of her grandmother's few surviving friends from that era. She had seen him only briefly before, but she felt certain he held the answers she needed. When she arrived at Mr. Jones's modest home, she found him sitting on his porch, his eyes brightening with recognition as he saw her. "Miss Maya," he said with a warm smile, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been expecting you." Maya felt a jolt of surprise. "You have?" Mr. Jones nodded, his expression serious. "Your grandmother and I. We shared more than a few secrets, Miss Maya. She told me one day you'd come looking for them." Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Mr. Jones, I need to know what happened to Charles, and I need to know why she kept it all hidden." The old man sighed, his gaze distant as he looked out over the yard. "Charles was a brave man, the bravest I knew, but his bravery cost him more than he ever expected." His voice grew softer, filled with sorrow. "They were hunted, Miss Maya, Charles especially. He was too visible, too determined, and the wrong people noticed. One night, he disappeared. Some say he was killed, others say he went into hiding. But your grandmother, she never stopped believing he'd find his way back to her." Maya felt tears sting her eyes, the depth of Evelyn's sacrifice finally hitting her. "Why didn't she tell my dad?" "Because she wanted to protect him," Mr. Jones replied gently. "If Jamal had known, he would have tried to find out more, and that could have put him in danger too. Evelyn did what she had to do to keep her family safe. But I think, deep down, she knew you'd find this someday. She always said you were more like her than you realized." As Maya listened, she felt a surge of pride and sorrow intertwine within her. Evelyn had faced unimaginable fear and loss, yet she had held on to her family's future with everything she had. Now, Maya understood that her grandmother's legacy wasn't just a story of love and resilience. It was a charge, a call to keep fighting for truth, even when fear tried to silence it. Over the following days, Maya found herself retreating into her grandmother's story even deeper, drawn by a desire to fully understand the legacy Evelyn had left behind. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together, each revelation leading her closer to a truth she was beginning to understand only she could bring to light. One afternoon, while Maya sat in her room reviewing the old notes and letters she had found, her father entered unexpectedly. She quickly tried to cover up the scattered papers, but Jamal's sharp gaze caught sight of one of the flyers from the old church, a leaflet that bore Evelyn's handwriting. "What? What is this?" he asked, his voice thick with a mixture of anger and pain. He picked up the leaflet, his fingers tracing the lines of Evelyn's script, and a sadness washed over his face that Maya had rarely seen. "It's from the church, Dad," Maya replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found it with other things Grandma left behind. I think she wanted me to find it, to know the truth." Jamal shook his head, his expression guarded. "Your grandmother. She went through a lot, Maya. Things I've tried to forget. There were things she kept secret for a reason. Maya took a steadying breath, mustering the courage she needed. But don't you see? She didn't just hide these things out of fear. She did it to protect us. And maybe because she thought no one would care about what she and Charles fought for. The mention of Charles caused her father's jaw to tighten, his gaze shifting to the window. Charles was, he was someone she loved, someone she couldn't forget, Jamal admitted, his voice low. When he disappeared, it changed her. She never talked about him to me, but I knew. She was always watching her back, always looking over her shoulder as if she was still waiting for him. Maya's heart ached as she imagined Evelyn living with that loss, that unending watchfulness. She reached out, touching her father's arm. "Dad, I don't want to lose this part of her. I want to remember her for who she really was, for what she stood for." He looked at her, his eyes softening, and nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time I told you everything I know." They sat together, and Jamal began recounting memories that Maya had never heard before. He described Evelyn as she had been in her youth, a vibrant, fearless woman whose heart was set on changing the world. Evelyn and Charles had been inseparable, partners in the fight for justice, until the night Charles disappeared. The people they had stood against, powerful men, silent enemies in the shadows, had managed to drive Charles into hiding, and Evelyn was left with a choice: to continue the fight or to protect her son, Jamal, by leaving it behind. "She always said she'd carry Charles with her," Jamal whispered, "but she also carried the fear that those people would come for her family someday." As Maya listened, a mix of anger and pride filled her. Evelyn's life was marked by more than just bravery. It was a series of sacrifices she had made without ever asking for recognition. And now, Maya felt, it was her turn to carry Evelyn's torch forward. The next day, determined to honor her grandmother's legacy, Maya decided to organize a tribute for Evelyn and Charles. She called Zoe, and together they began planning a small gathering at the old church, a place that had once been a hub for the very movement Evelyn and Charles had fought to protect. They spread word quietly, contacting people who had known Evelyn and inviting those in the community who had stories of their own to share. The evening of the tribute arrived, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, people began gathering at the abandoned church. The dim glow of candles lined the steps, casting a warm light on the faces of those who had come to remember and celebrate. Standing in front of the crowd, Maya took a deep breath, feeling both nervous and inspired. She looked over the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, all of them joined by a silent understanding of why they were here. "My grandmother Evelyn was a woman of strength, of courage," Maya began, her voice echoing softly through the quiet space. "She fought for justice when others feared to, and she loved with a fierceness that could not be silenced. She may have kept parts of her life hidden, but her legacy was always here, in this community, with all of you." She paused, looking around the room, feeling the weight of her grandmother's story settle over them. "And tonight, I want to remember her. I want to remember Charles, too, and all of those who stood beside them, who risked everything to fight for a better world." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Maya saw tears in the eyes of a few older attendees. Slowly, one by one, people began to share their stories, memories of Evelyn, tales of resistance and bravery, quiet moments of strength they had shared with her. As each story unfolded, Maya felt a warmth grow within her, the powerful connection of shared history and resilience. Mr. Jones, the old caretaker, stepped forward, holding a photograph that had yellowed with time. It was a picture of Evelyn and Charles standing arm in arm in front of the church, their faces bright with hope and determination. "They were both so young," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "They gave us hope. They showed us what courage looked like. And even though we lost them, we've never forgotten." Maya's eyes blurred with tears as she looked at the photograph. She thought of the many sacrifices, the quiet acts of defiance, the struggles that had bound her grandmother and Charles together. In that moment, she realized the full extent of Evelyn's gift to her family, the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. As the tribute came to an end, Maya felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The legacy of her grandmother and Charles was no longer a secret burden, hidden away and feared. It was a story that had been shared, a flame that had been passed down to those who would carry it forward. When the gathering dispersed, Maya lingered at the steps of the church, staring up at the weathered building, imagining Evelyn and Charles standing there all those years ago. Her father approached, placing a hand on her shoulder, and together they stood in silence, each lost in their own memories. "Thank you, Maya," he said softly. "You gave her the tribute she deserved." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the past lift, replaced by a quiet determination. She knew that her journey wasn't over, that there were still more stories to uncover, more voices to amplify. But she also knew that she was ready to take on that responsibility, to keep her grandmother's spirit alive in every choice she made. As they left the church that night, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would carry on Evelyn's legacy, sharing her story, honoring her courage, and fighting for the justice that Evelyn and Charles had believed in so fiercely. The days following the tribute at the church passed in a blur, but Maya felt a lightness she hadn't known in months. She'd come face to face with her family's legacy, and rather than hiding from it, she had embraced it. Her grandmother's story no longer felt like a haunting mystery. It felt like a powerful call to action, one she couldn't ignore. Maya's determination to preserve Evelyn and Charles's memory only grew stronger. One morning she approached her father with a new idea. "Dad," she began hesitantly, watching him as he sipped his coffee, "I think we should start a scholarship in Grandma Evelyn's name. Something to support students who want to study social justice or civil rights law." Jamal looked at her thoughtfully, setting his coffee cup down. "A scholarship. I think she would have loved that," he said, a slow smile forming on his face. "But it's a big undertaking, Maya. There's a lot involved. Finding the funding, setting up the organization, managing the applications." "I know," Maya replied, her tone resolute. "But I want to do this. I want people to remember her and Charles, to know their story. And I think a scholarship would be a way to continue their work." Jamal nodded, pride shining in his eyes. "Let's do it then. I'll help you, and we'll get the community involved." "I think you're right. It's time people remembered what they stood for." They spent the next few weeks immersed in preparations. Maya felt a surge of purpose and excitement as they met with local leaders, visited schools, and organized fundraisers. She reached out to the people who had attended the tribute, many of whom shared memories of Evelyn and offered support for the project. Soon, word spread throughout the community, and donations began trickling in. As the scholarship fund grew, Maya felt herself becoming more deeply connected to Evelyn's legacy. The faces of students she met reminded her of the passion Evelyn must have felt when she first joined the movement. Maya knew that, like her grandmother, many of these young people dreamed of making a difference. She was determined to give them the chance to do so. One afternoon, as Maya was leaving a meeting with the scholarship committee, she noticed a man watching her from across the street. His dark coat and sharp gaze were all too familiar. The same stranger who had followed her weeks before. Her heart quickened, and she forced herself to keep walking, even as she felt his eyes on her. Later that night, she confided in her father. "Dad, there's a man who's been watching me. I've seen him more than once, and I think he was at the tribute too." Jamal's face darkened, his worry evident. "Do you think he's connected to the people who were after Grandma and Charles?" Maya nodded slowly. "I don't know for sure, but it's possible. Evelyn and Charles fought against powerful people, and maybe some of them are still around, still trying to silence their story." Jamal sighed, running a hand over his face. "We should be careful, Maya. If you see him again, let me know. We might have to involve the authorities if this goes any further." Maya agreed, but she knew that a part of her refused to feel intimidated. She had come too far, and her conviction to honor Evelyn's legacy was stronger than her fear. A week later, as the scholarship fund officially launched, the community gathered for a special event to celebrate the occasion. Maya, standing in front of the crowd, felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She saw the faces of young students, families and elders who had come to honor Evelyn and Charles's memory, and she knew they were carrying forward the spirit of resilience and hope her grandmother had instilled in them. As the event drew to a close, Mr. Jones approached her with a proud smile. "You've done something truly remarkable, Maya. Your grandmother would be proud of you." Maya felt a lump in her throat as she returned his smile. "Thank you, Mr. Jones. I couldn't have done it without everyone here, and without your guidance." Just then, she noticed the same man in the dark coat, standing at the edge of the gathering, half hidden in the shadows. His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something unexpected, a flicker of recognition, as if he were seeing Evelyn herself in her. Driven by a surge of bravery, Maya excused herself and walked toward him. The man didn't move, his gaze steady as she approached. When she was close enough, she spoke, her voice strong and clear. "Who are you, and why have you been following me?" The man's face softened slightly, and he gave a slow nod, as if acknowledging her courage. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I knew your grandmother, Evelyn. She and we worked together in those days." Maya's eyes widened, her suspicion giving way to surprise. "You knew her? Then why didn't you come forward sooner?" The man looked away, a hint of sadness crossing his face. "After Charles disappeared, I went into hiding. Evelyn and Charles weren't the only ones who were hunted, Maya. We were all targets, and I had my own family to protect. I kept my distance, thinking it was the safest choice. But I've been watching you because I wanted to make sure you were safe, that no one would try to silence you as they did with Charles." Maya's heart pounded with a mix of relief and understanding. "So, you've been protecting me?" The man nodded. "In my own way, yes. But now I see you don't need my protection. You've inherited Evelyn's strength, her courage, and seeing you carry on her legacy, it's like seeing a part of her come back to life." Maya felt a swell of emotion, realizing that this man represented one more thread connecting her to Evelyn's world. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." The man smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. "The world needs people like you, Maya, people who don't forget the sacrifices of those who came before. Don't let anything or anyone stand in your way." As he walked away, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that her journey wasn't just about honoring her grandmother's memory. It was about carrying forward the spirit of resilience, of unyielding hope, and of justice that Evelyn and Charles had fought for. The scholarship fund grew rapidly in the following months, receiving widespread support from individuals and organizations alike. Maya devoted herself tirelessly to the cause, helping to select the first round of scholarship recipients, each one a young person committed to the ideals of equality and justice. She saw Evelyn's legacy blossoming in each of them, and she knew that through this work she was giving back to her community in the way Evelyn would have wanted. One evening, as Maya and Jamal were reviewing applications, he paused, looking over at her with a thoughtful expression. "I think Evelyn would have been amazed by you, Maya. She would have been proud, not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." Maya smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, Dad. We're both carrying her legacy." Jamal nodded, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "You've shown me things I'd tried to forget, and I'm grateful. You've given Evelyn's story the life it deserves." As they sat together, Maya felt that she was finally at peace with the story she'd uncovered. The journey had taken her through the pain of the past and shown her the strength that lived within her bloodline. Evelyn and Charles were gone, but their spirits lived on through every young person whose path would be changed by the scholarship fund. Maya knew that her role in this story wasn't over. It was only beginning. She would keep telling Evelyn's story, honoring her family's legacy, and working toward a world that reflected the justice her grandmother had once dreamed of. In that quiet moment, as the stars twinkled outside, Maya made a promise to herself and to Evelyn. She would carry the torch forward, no matter how far she had to go. Evelyn's fight would live on, and Maya would be its keeper. As Maya settled into her new role as the head of the scholarship fund, her connection to Evelyn's legacy deepened. Each day brought new applications, new stories of young people striving to bring positive change to the world. Maya felt closer to her grandmother than ever before, as though she were walking beside her, guiding her forward. One afternoon, as she sorted through the latest applications, Maya came across a name that made her pause. Carter Woods. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the letter attached to the application, written by a young man explaining his drive to make a difference in his community. "My father named me after someone he called a true hero," Carter had written. "Charles Carter was my father's mentor, a man who fought for justice and equality, even when it cost him everything. My father always told me that Charles taught him the importance of standing up for others, and I want to carry that same torch." Maya's hands trembled as she held the letter. Charles Carter had a namesake, a young man determined to carry forward his legacy. Without hesitating, she picked up the phone and called her father. "Dad, I think you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Jamal arrived a short while later, and together they pored over Carter's application. Jamal was visibly moved, reading the words of a young man inspired by his grandmother's lost love. For years, they had thought Charles's memory was confined to the shadows, remembered only by a few close friends and family. But here was proof that his legacy had survived, carried forward through his name and the lives he had touched. "We have to meet him," Maya said, her voice filled with determination. "He deserves to know what Charles meant to us, and to Grandma." Jamal nodded, his eyes misty with emotion. "He deserves that, and so do we." They arranged to meet Carter Woods at a small coffee shop in the heart of the city. Maya and Jamal arrived early, sitting at a corner table, nervously glancing at the door. A few minutes later, a young man with striking features and an air of quiet confidence walked in. He looked around, spotted them, and smiled, making his way over. As Carter introduced himself, Maya felt an immediate sense of familiarity, as if she were meeting a long-lost friend. His presence seemed to carry echoes of Charles, his calm demeanor, the strength in his gaze. Jamal shook his hand firmly, and the three of them sat down, sharing a few polite words before diving into the reason they had come. "Carter," Maya began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "we asked to meet you because your father's mentor, Charles Carter, he was my grandmother's partner. He was her everything." Carter's face lit with a mix of surprise and respect. "I had no idea. My father talked about him often, but he never mentioned Evelyn. He always said that Charles was the bravest person he knew, that he dedicated his life to fighting for justice. I only wish I could have met him." Jamal nodded, his eyes reflecting the depth of his emotions. Charles was a remarkable man. He fought alongside Evelyn, risking his life every day. When he disappeared, well, Evelyn was never the same. But knowing he inspired your father, and that you're here carrying his legacy, it means everything. The three sat in silence for a moment, each of them feeling the weight of Charles's presence in the room. Maya felt a profound sense of connection, as if she were bridging generations, carrying forward both Evelyn's and Charles's dreams. Carter spoke again, his voice filled with determination. "I've spent my life trying to live up to the example my father and Charles set. And now, knowing about Evelyn, I feel even more inspired. I want to be a part of this scholarship fund. I want to help carry their message forward." Maya and Jamal exchanged a glance, both of them moved by his words. They knew that bringing Carter on board would be a way to continue Evelyn and Charles's work, to create a legacy that reached far beyond their own lives. Together, they began discussing ideas, brainstorming ways to grow the scholarship, to ensure it reached those most in need. Over the next several weeks, Carter became an integral part of the fund. He brought fresh ideas, a deep understanding of the struggles faced by marginalized communities, and a passion that reinvigorated Maya's and Jamal's own commitment to the cause. With his help, they expanded the scholarship's reach, partnering with other organizations, hosting community events, and creating mentorship programs that connected scholarship recipients with leaders in social justice and civil rights. One afternoon, as the three of them were wrapping up a meeting at the office, Carter turned to Maya with a thoughtful expression. "There's something I think we should do," he said, glancing between her and Jamal. Charles always believed in the power of community, in bringing people together to learn from each other. What if we create an annual event, a day where we invite community members, activists, and students to share stories, learn from one another, and remember those who paved the way for us? Maya felt a thrill of excitement. "An annual legacy day, I love it. We could host panels, discussions, and even have some of the scholarship recipients share their experiences." Jamal nodded, his eyes lighting up. "And we can honor people who've made a difference like Evelyn and Charles. It would be a way to keep their spirit alive, to inspire the next generation to keep fighting for justice." They set to work immediately, planning the first Legacy Day. Word spread quickly, and soon people from all walks of life were reaching out, wanting to be part of the event. Maya was overwhelmed by the support, by the way people rallied behind the idea. She felt as though her grandmother's dream was truly alive again, shared by a whole new generation of believers. On the day of the event, the community center was filled to capacity. The walls were lined with photographs of Evelyn, Charles, and other civil rights heroes who had fought for justice. As Maya took the stage, She felt a surge of pride and gratitude. She looked out at the faces in the crowd, seeing Carter, her father, Mr. Jones, and even the stranger who had watched over her, now sitting among the guests, a silent guardian of Evelyn's memory. Maya spoke with a calm but powerful voice, her words flowing from the depths of her heart. She told the story of her grandmother's life, of her love for Charles, and of the fight they had both dedicated themselves to. She spoke of the fear they had faced, of the sacrifices they had made, and of the lasting impact their work had left on the world. Evelyn and Charles showed us that true courage isn't just about standing up once, Maya said, her voice strong. It's about showing up every day, fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves, and lifting each other up. Their legacy is a call to action, a call to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult the journey may be. The crowd erupted into applause, and Maya felt her heart swell with emotion. As she stepped down from the stage, people approached her, sharing words of thanks, of solidarity, and of admiration for her and her family's dedication. As the event drew to a close, Maya and Carter stood together, watching the crowd mingle, their spirits lifted by the stories they had shared. Carter turned to her, his face filled with admiration. "Maya, you've created something incredible here. Evelyn and Charles would be proud of you." Maya smiled, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. "I couldn't have done it alone. They're a part of all of us now, and this is just the beginning." As they left the community center that night, Maya felt a sense of peace and purpose settle over her. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there would always be new challenges to face, new injustices to fight. But with Carter and her father by her side, and with the strength of her grandmother's memory guiding her, she was ready for whatever lay ahead. Evelyn's legacy was no longer just a hidden part of her family's past. It was a beacon, a guiding light that would inspire future generations. And as Maya walked into the night, she knew that she was carrying that light forward, honoring the past and illuminating a path toward a brighter, more just future. The months following the first Legacy Day were transformative for both Maya and her community. The scholarship fund, bolstered by the event's success, continued to grow, enabling more young activists to pursue their dreams. Maya poured herself into the work, driven by the understanding that each step forward was a tribute to Evelyn and Charles. As she and Carter became closer, they shared late nights planning, researching, and reaching out to new partners. One evening, as Maya prepared to leave the scholarship office, Carter lingered by her desk, an expression of thoughtfulness on his face. "Maya, I've been thinking," he said, crossing his arms. "There are so many stories like Evelyn's and Charles's out there, hidden stories that people are afraid to tell. What if we created a platform where people can share those stories, a place where others can learn and be inspired by them?" Maya's eyes lit up. "A storytelling project. We could invite people to share personal accounts of resilience, courage, and social change. Imagine what that could mean for people who've felt silenced for so long." Carter nodded, his excitement evident. "We could call it Voices of Resilience, something that honors Evelyn's story but opens the door for others to speak their truths." Without wasting time, they began outlining the project, imagining an archive filled with stories from all walks of life. They envisioned videos, written accounts, and photographs, all capturing the spirit of those who had fought for justice or overcome adversity. Maya knew that such a project would require more resources than they currently had, but she was undeterred. The importance of preserving these stories far outweighed any logistical challenges. In the weeks that followed, they reached out to local activists, elders, and families, asking if they'd be willing to share their stories. To their surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Many people had memories of the civil rights movement or stories of recent struggles for justice, and they were eager to contribute. As the stories began to flow in, Maya felt a powerful sense of connection to each voice, each experience, each truth. One afternoon, Maya received an unexpected email. It was from a woman named Grace Williams, a childhood friend of Evelyn's who had left the city many years ago. Grace explained that she had known Evelyn since their teenage years and had even marched alongside her and Charles. She asked if she could visit, as she had something important to share. When Grace arrived at the scholarship office a few days later, Maya was struck by her presence. Though in her 70s, Grace carried herself with a quiet dignity, her eyes bright and full of life. She greeted Maya with a warm smile and held her hands tightly. "I've been waiting for a chance to talk to someone about Evelyn," Grace said softly. "There's so much you might not know. She was one of the most fearless people I ever knew." Maya guided Grace to a seat and listened with rapt attention as she began to recount stories of her grandmother. Grace described Evelyn as a fierce and compassionate leader, someone who had known early on the dangers they faced but had never let it deter her. She spoke of late-night meetings, coded messages, and the constant fear of being discovered. "She believed in what she was doing so deeply," Grace said, her voice wavering, "and she and Charles, they shared a bond that went beyond words. He made her feel safe, even in the darkest times. When he disappeared, it was like a piece of her soul had been taken." Maya's throat tightened as she listened, her heart aching for the grandmother she wished she had known. "Why didn't she talk about it, though?" she asked. "Why keep it all hidden, even from Dad?" Grace sighed, a pained look in her eyes. The fear never really left her. Even after the threats stopped, she worried that anyone who got too close to the truth might be in danger. And she wanted Jamal to live freely without that fear shadowing him. As Grace continued to share memories, she revealed a detail that made Maya's pulse quicken. Before Charles disappeared, Grace said, he told Evelyn he'd buried a time capsule with important documents, things he thought would help future generations understand the truth. He wanted to preserve the memories of their fight and protect the people they'd helped. Maya leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Do you know where he buried it?" Grace shook her head. "He never told anyone exactly where. He wanted it to stay hidden until the right person came along to find it. But I think he hoped someone like you would one day uncover it." This revelation filled Maya with a renewed sense of purpose. She thanked Grace, who left her with an encouraging smile and a promise to stay in touch. Once she was alone, Maya thought of the time capsule. It was likely hidden in a place only someone close to Evelyn and Charles would recognize, a spot that held significance for them. That night, she shared the discovery with her father and Carter. Jamal, though visibly moved, admitted he had no idea where the time capsule might be. But Carter's face lit up. "I think I know," he said. "There's a spot near the church where Evelyn and Charles used to meet, an old oak tree by the riverbank. My father took me there once and said that was where he'd met Charles. It was a place of refuge for them." Without hesitation, they planned a visit to the site the next morning. Maya could hardly sleep that night, the anticipation filling her with both excitement and dread. What would they find? What truths had Charles buried beneath that old tree, waiting for them to uncover? The following morning, Maya, Jamal, and Carter set off for the riverbank. The air was crisp, and a sense of reverence settled over them as they approached the towering oak tree, its branches stretching wide, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Maya felt as though Evelyn and Charles were there with them, guiding their steps. They searched around the base of the tree, examining the roots and soil, looking for any sign of disturbance. Finally, after several minutes of digging, Jamal's spade hit something solid. Carefully, they unearthed a small, rusted metal box, its edges worn but still intact. Maya's hands trembled as she helped lift it out, brushing away the dirt. With bated breath, she opened the box. Inside, they found a collection of carefully wrapped documents, photographs, and a small, leather-bound notebook. Maya lifted the notebook, her eyes catching Charles's handwriting on the first page. To those who come after us, know that our fight was one of love, hope, and justice. May these words guide you and remind you of the power we all hold. Tears welled in Maya's eyes as she read, feeling the weight of Charles's words. She gently handed the notebook to her father, who began leafing through it with a reverence that spoke of deep connection and sorrow. As he read, Maya and Carter sifted through the rest of the contents, uncovering letters, maps, and a list of names, individuals who had been involved in the movement, people who had stood beside Evelyn and Charles in their fight. This is everything, Jamal whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Charles wanted this to be found. He wanted us to carry on what they started. Over the following days, Maya, Jamal, and Carter carefully examined each document. They realized that they had uncovered not only a piece of family history, but a significant record of the civil rights movement. Charles had chronicled the events they had lived through, documenting the struggles, the victories, and the losses that had shaped them. It was a story that deserved to be told, a legacy that needed to be shared. Inspired by this discovery, Maya made a bold decision. She would publish Charles's and Evelyn's story. She reached out to local historians and journalists, sharing the details of their journey, the letters, and the time capsule. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People wanted to know the story, to hear Evelyn's and Charles's voices echo through time. When the book was finally published, it was more than Maya had dreamed. Titled Love and Legacy, The Story of Evelyn and Charles. It became a beacon for those seeking to understand the true costs of justice. Schools invited Maya to speak. Civil rights organizations used the book to educate young activists, and families reached out to share how the story had inspired them. Maya's heart swelled each time she saw someone reading the book, each time she heard someone mention Evelyn and Charles's names. She knew she had fulfilled her grandmother's deepest wish to preserve her legacy and share her story so it would inspire others to stand up for what they believed in. Evelyn's legacy was now more than a family memory. It had become a living force, an enduring reminder of the strength and courage woven into every page, every life, and every heart that dared to believe in a better world. And for Maya, it was the ultimate tribute, a way to honor those who had come before her and to ensure that the torch would never again be hidden in the shadows. With Love and Legacy, the story of Evelyn and Charles. Spreading far beyond her city, Maya felt a profound sense of completion and fulfillment. The response was more than she had anticipated. People wrote to her, sharing how Evelyn and Charles's story had inspired them to take action, to be fearless, and to honor the legacies of their own families. One morning, she received a letter from a young woman named Leona, a recent scholarship recipient. Leona's words were heartfelt and filled with determination. Reading your grandmother's story has shown me that I'm not alone, that people before me fought the same fight I'm facing today. I'm committed to finishing my studies and starting my own initiative for underrepresented students, just like Evelyn would have wanted. Thank you for sharing her with us. Maya was moved to tears as she read. Leona's words resonated with everything Evelyn had taught her, every part of the journey she had uncovered. Her grandmother's legacy was alive, breathing in the ambitions of young people who carried Evelyn and Charles's spirit forward. Inspired, Maya organized one final gathering, a closing ceremony for the first round of scholarship recipients. She called it the Legacy Circle, a day where past and present recipients would come together, sharing stories, ideas, and plans for the future. She wanted this circle to reflect the deep sense of unity and resilience her grandmother had fostered. The Legacy Circle was held in the same community center where the first Legacy Day had taken place. The hall was filled with scholarship recipients, local activists, elders, and supporters from every corner of the community. As Maya looked around, she saw the faces of young people who had once felt unheard, now filled with hope and resolve. Maya took the stage, pausing to let the moment settle over her before she spoke. Her father, Carter, Mr. Jones, and even Grace were in the audience, all of them witnessing the fulfillment of Evelyn's legacy. "When I first began this journey," Maya began, her voice calm but filled with emotion, "I thought it was about uncovering my grandmother's story, about learning who Evelyn really was. But over time I realized that this journey is about all of us. It's about every person in this room who believes in justice, who fights for what's right, and who refuses to let their voice be silenced." She looked out over the audience, feeling the weight of Evelyn's presence with her. "Evelyn and Charles taught us that we're stronger together, that our voices echo louder when we speak as one. This circle, this community, is their legacy, and each of us here carries a piece of that legacy forward." The room was silent, each person captivated by her words. Maya felt the warmth of pride swell in her chest, and she smiled, seeing tears in the eyes of those who shared her journey. After the ceremony, Maya sat with Jamal, Carter, and Mr. Jones in a quiet corner of the room, watching as people mingled, laughed, and shared stories. Mr. Jones turned to her, his eyes glistening. "You've done something extraordinary, Maya," he said softly. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." Maya nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "It's not just me, it's everyone who believed in her, in what she stood for. She wanted us to keep fighting, to keep her dream alive." Jamal placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze warm. "You've given her story life, Maya. You've shown me things I'd hidden away for years, and I'm grateful." They shared a quiet moment of understanding, the weight of Evelyn's memory binding them together in ways that words could not express. Maya felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that her grandmother's story was no longer hidden, but held by those who cherished it. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the hall emptied, Carter approached Maya with a small, thoughtful smile. "Evelyn and Charles would have been proud to see this, to know their story inspired so many people," he said. Maya nodded, a gentle smile forming on her lips. "It's not over, though. There's so much more to do. The Legacy Circle, the Scholarship Fund, Voices of Resilience. They're all just the beginning." Carter nodded, his gaze steady and encouraging. "Then let's keep building it together. This legacy deserves to keep growing, and I'll be right here with you." As they left the community center that night, Maya walked slowly, savoring the cool air and the quiet hum of the city around her. She felt as if Evelyn were walking beside her, her presence a constant, guiding force. Looking up at the stars, Maya made one final promise to her grandmother. She would carry forward Evelyn and Charles's dream, nurturing it, sharing it, and passing it along to each new generation that would come. This legacy wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who dared to believe in justice, in hope, in the enduring power of love. And in that moment, she felt the fullness of her grandmother's dream alive in her heart, lighting her path forward and filling her with an unbreakable spirit. Evelyn's legacy was secure, and Maya knew that as long as she lived, she would honor it with every step she took.